Today we are going to be reading from chapter 3 of The Magician's Nephew, which is the first book in the Narnia series. And this chapter is called The Wood Between Worlds. Uncle Andrew and his study vanished instantly, and then, for a moment, everything became muddled. The next thing Diggory knew was that there was a soft green light coming down on him from above and darkness below. He didn't seem to be standing on anything, or sitting, or lying. Nothing appeared to be touching him. "I believe I'm in water," said Diggory. "Or underwater." This frightened him for a second, but almost at once he could feel that he was rushing upwards. Then he found his head suddenly came out of the air, and he found himself scrambling ashore onto smooth, grassy ground at the edge of a pool. As he rose to his feet, he noticed that he was neither dripping or panting for breath as anyone would expect from being underwater. His clothes were perfectly dry. He was standing by the edge of a small pool, no more than 10 feet from side to side, in a wood. The trees grew close together and were so leafy that he couldn't get a glimpse of the sky. All the light was green light that came through the leaves, but there must have been a very strong sun overhead, for this green daylight was bright and warm. It was the quietest wood you could possibly imagine. There were no birds, no insects, no animals, and no wind. You could almost feel the trees growing. The pool he had come out of was not the only pool. There were dozens of them. A pool every few yards as far as his eyes could reach. You could almost feel the trees drinking up the water with their roots. This wood felt very much alive. When he tried to describe it afterwards, Diggory always said it was a rich place, rich as a plum cake. The strangest thing was that, almost before he had looked about him, Diggory had forgotten how he had come there. At any rate, he was certainly not thinking about Polly or Uncle Andrew or even his mother. He was not in the least frightened or excited or curious. If anyone had asked him, "Where did you come from?" he probably would have said, "Why, I've always been here," because that's what it felt like, as if he had always been in that place and never been bored and nothing had ever happened. As he said long afterwards, it's not the sort of place where things happen. The trees grow on growing, that's all. After Diggory had looked at the wood for a long while, he noticed there was a girl lying on her back at the foot of a tree a few yards away. Her eyes were nearly shut, but not quite. As if she was just between sleeping and waking. So he looked at her for a long time and said nothing. And then at last she opened her eyes and looked at him for a long time, and she also said nothing. Then she spoke in a dreamy, contented sort of voice. "I think I've seen you before," she said. "I rather think so too," said Diggory. "How long have you been here?" "Oh, always," said the girl. "At least, I don't know, a very long time." "So have I," said Diggory. "No, you haven't," she said. "I've just seen you come up out of that pool." "Why, yes, I suppose I did," said Diggory with a puzzled air. "I'd forgotten." Then for quite a long time neither said any more. "Look here," said the girl presently. "I wonder, did we ever meet before? I have a sort of idea, a sort of picture in my head of a boy and a girl like us, living somewhere quite different, doing all sorts of things. But perhaps it was only a dream." "I've had that same dream too," said Diggory, "about a boy and a girl living next door, and something about crawling among rafters. I remember that the girl had a dirty face. Aren't you getting it mixed up? In my dream, it was the boy who had the dirty face." "I can't remember the boy's face," said Diggory, and then added, "Oh, hello, what's that?" "Why, it's a guinea pig," said the girl. And it was a fat guinea pig, nosing about in the grass. But round the middle of the guinea pig there ran a tape, and tied onto the tape was a bright yellow ring. "Look, look!" cried Diggory. "The ring! And look, you've got one on your finger, and so have I." The girl now sat up, really interested at last. They stared at one another, trying to remember, and then exactly at the same moment, she shouted out, "Mr. Kettering!" and he shouted out, "Uncle Andrew!" And they knew who they were and began to remember the whole story. After a few minutes of hard talking, they had got it straight. Diggory explained how beastly Uncle Andrew had been. "What do we do now?" said Polly. "Take the guinea pig and go home?" "There's no hurry," said Diggory with a huge yawn. "I think there is," said Polly. "This place is too quiet. It's so dreamy. You're almost asleep. If we give in to it, we should just lie down and drowse forever and ever." "It's very nice here," said Diggory. "Yes, it is," said Polly. "We've got to get back." She stood up and began to cautiously move towards the guinea pig, but then she changed her mind. "We may as well leave the guinea pig here. It's perfectly happy, and your uncle will only do something horrid to it if we take it home." "I bet he would," said Diggory. "Look at the way he's treated us. By the way, how do we get back home?" "Go back into the pool, I expect." They came and stood together at the edge, looking down into the smooth water. It was full of reflection of the green leafy branches, and they made it look very deep. "We haven't got any bathing things," said Polly. "We shan't need them, silly," said Diggory. "We're going in with our clothes on. Don't you remember? It didn't wet us on the way up." "Can you swim?" "A bit. Can you?" "I don't think we should need to swim," said Diggory. "We want to go down, don't we?" Neither of them much liked the idea of jumping into that pool, but neither said so to the other. They took hands and said, "1, 2, 3, go!" And they jumped, and there was a great splash, and of course they closed their eyes. But when they opened them again, they found that they were still standing, hand in hand in the green wood, hardly up to their ankles in water. The pool, apparently, was only a couple of inches deep. They splashed back onto the dry ground. "What on earth's gone wrong?" said Polly in a frightened voice, but not quite as frightened as you might expect, because it's really hard to feel frightened in that wood. The place was too peaceful. "Oh, I know," said Diggory. "Of course it won't work. We're still wearing our yellow rings. They're for the outward journey, you know. The green ones take you back home. We must change rings. Have you got pockets? Good. Put your yellow one in your left. I've got 2 greens. Here's one for you." They put on their green rings and came back to the pool. But before they tried another jump, Diggory gave a long, "Oh, oh!" "What's the matter?" said Polly. "I've just had a really wonderful idea," said Diggory. "What are all the other pools?" "How do you mean?" "Well, if we can get back into our own world by jumping in this pool, mightn't we get somewhere else by jumping into one of the others, supposing that there was a world at the bottom of every pool?" "But I thought we already were in your Uncle Andrew's other world or other place or whatever he called it, didn't you say?" "Oh, bother Uncle Andrew," interrupted Diggory. "I don't believe he knows anything about it. He never had the pluck to come here himself. He only talked of one other world, but I bet there were dozens." "You mean this wood might be not be the only one of them?" "I don't believe this wood is a world at all. I think it's a sort of in-between place." "Don't you see?" said Diggory. "No, do listen. Think of our tunnel under the slates at home. It isn't a room in any of the houses. In a way, it isn't really a part of any of the houses. But once you're in the tunnel, you can go along it and come into any of the houses in the row. Mightn't this wood be the same? A place that isn't in any of the woods, but once you've found the place, that place can get you into all of them. Well, even if you can, began Polly, but Diggory went on, as if he hadn't heard her. And of course, that explains everything, he said. That's why it's so quiet and sleepy here and nothing ever happens. Just like at home. It's in the houses that people talk and do things and have meals, and nothing goes on in the in-between places, behind the walls and above the ceilings and under the floor, or in our own tunnel. But when you come out of our tunnel, you may find yourself in any house. I think we can get out of this place into jolly well anywhere. We don't need to jump back into the same pool we came up by, or not just yet. The wood between the worlds, said Polly dreamily. It sounds rather nice. Come on, said Diggory. Which pool shall we try? Look here, said Polly. I'm not going to try a new pool till we've made sure that we can get back to the old one, and we're not even sure if it will work yet. Yes, said Diggory, and get caught by Uncle Andrew and have our rings taken away before we've had any fun. No thanks. Couldn't we go just part of the way down into our own pool, said Polly, just to see if it works, and then if it does, we change rings and come back up again, before we're really in Mr. Ketchley's study. Can we go part of the way down? Well, it took time coming up. I suppose it would take a little time going back. Diggory made rather a fuss about agreeing to this, but he had to in the end because Polly absolutely refused to do any exploring in new worlds until she'd made absolutely sure about getting back to the old one. She was quite brave, as he was about some dangers, wasps for instance, but she was not so interested in finding out things nobody had heard of before, for Diggory was the sort of person who wants to know everything. When he grew up, he would become like the famous Professor Kirk, who comes into other books. After a great deal of arguing, they agreed to put on the green rings. Green for safety, said Diggory, so you can't help remembering which is which. And they hold hands and jump. But as soon as they seemed to be getting back to Uncle Andrew's study, or even to their own worlds, Polly was to shout change, and they would slip off their green rings and put back on their yellows. Diggory wanted to be the one to shout change, but Polly didn't agree. They put on the green rings, took hands, and once more shouted 1, 2, 3, go! This time, it worked. And everything happened so quickly. At first, there were bright lights moving about in a black sky. Diggory always thinks that these were stars, and even swears that he saw Jupiter quite close enough to see its moon. But almost at once, there were rows and roofs of chimney pots about them, and they could see St. Paul's, and knew that they were looking at London. But you could see through the walls of the houses, and they could see Uncle Andrew. Very vague and shadowy, but getting clearer and more solid looking all of the time. But just before he came real, Polly shouted, change! And they did change. And the world faded away like a dream, and the green light grew stronger and stronger, till above their heads they came out of the pool, and they scrambled ashore. And there was the wood all around them, as green and bright as it ever, and the whole thing had taken less than a minute. There, said Diggory. That's all right. Now, for the adventure. Any pool will do. Come on, let's try that one. Stop, said Polly. Aren't we going to mark this pool? They stared at each other and turned quite white as they realised the dreadful thing that Diggory had been going to do. For there were any number of pools in the wood, and the pools were all alike, and the trees were also alike, so that once they left the pool that led to their own world without making some sort of a landmark, the chances would have been 100 to 1 about ever finding their way home again. Diggory's hand was shaking as he opened his penknife and cut out a long strip of turf on the bank of the pool. The soil, which smelled nice, was a rich reddish brown, and it showed up well against the green. It's a good thing one of us has some sense. Well, don't keep gassing on about it, said Diggory. Come along. I want to see what's in one of the other pools. And Polly gave him a pretty sharp answer, and he said something even nastier in reply. The quarrel lasted several minutes, but it was dull to write it all down. Let's skip to the moment where they stood at the edge with beating hearts of the unknown pool with their yellow rings on and held hands once more. 1, 2, 3, go! Splash! It hadn't worked again. This pool, too, appeared to be just a puddle. Instead of reaching a new world, they'd only got their feet wet and splashed their legs for the second time that morning. If it was a morning, it always seemed to be the same time in the wood between the worlds. Blast and botheration! Exclaimed Diggory. What's gone wrong now? We put our yellow rings on all right. He said yellow was for the outward journey. Now, the truth was, Uncle Andrew, who knew nothing about the wood between the worlds, had been quite wrong about the rings. The yellow ones weren't outward rings, and the green ones weren't homeward rings, at least not in the way that he thought. The stuff from which both of them had made from had all come from the wood. The stuff in the yellow rings had the power of drawing you back into the wood. It was the stuff that wanted to get back to its own place, the in-between place. But the stuff in the green rings was the stuff that was trying to get out of its own place. So a green ring would take you out of the wood into a new world. Uncle Andrew, you see, was working with things he did not really understand. Most magicians are. Of course, Diggory did not realise the truth quite clearly either, and not till later. But when they talked it over, they decided to try the other rings, the green rings, on in the new pool, just to see what happened. I'm game if you are, said Polly. But she really said this because in her heart of hearts, she felt like neither kind of ring was going to work in the new pool. So there was nothing more to be afraid of than another splash. I'm not quite sure that Diggory had the same feeling. At any rate, when they both had put their greens and come back to the edge of the water and taken hands again, they were certainly a good deal more cheerful and less solemn than they had been the first time. 1, 2, 3, go! Said Diggory, and they jumped. And that is the end of chapter 3.